Factoring. Grouping. When you have 4 or more terms, try to factor by grouping sets of terms. Look for a GCF, a greatest common factor of each set or group of terms. Then see if your group has a GCF, okay? And so grouping is simply a GCF at least 3 times, but the final GCF is a group of terms. Grouping gives it the name from various places. You're grouping terms up, so it's grouping, and then when you finally get your final GCF, it's a group of terms. It's in parentheses. It looks a little funny. So the first couple I want to do are kind of warm-ups and jumping jacks. I would really never do this bottom one that's on here. This one, I would never really do that this way, although there are people that teach splitting those things up and that kind of stuff. I don't do it that way. But that's fine, however you can learn it. But I hope that this helps you. I want to go through grouping with you briefly here just for a few minutes. So when I look at this first one, I have x and then I have x minus 2. This is all a factor. It's in parentheses, plus 7. And again, I have a whole factor in parentheses. This is a group of terms. Are those two groups of terms the same thing? Yes. Well, what do I do whenever I factor out a GCF? I write it in front. So x minus 2 in front, and then what's left over? X plus 7. So x plus 7. And there it is. Okay? How do I know I'm done grouping or done factoring? There are no pluses and minuses outside of parentheses. There's no powers bigger than 1. And I don't have a GCF anywhere. So this plus sign, see it's not in parentheses? That tells me I'm not done factoring. Okay? That tells me I'm not done factoring when I see a plus sign outside of parentheses. So if you saw this, if you saw xw plus 7w, even just forget this problem is over here. Forget this problem is over here right now. Okay? If you saw xw plus 7w and I said factor it, you would say, oh, there's a w in common and what's left? X plus 7. Well, I did the same thing. This is my w. I wrote it in the front just like I did w, right? So that's a simpler version where w, this is my w, x minus 2, all right? We write our GCFs out front. We don't square it. We didn't put x minus 2 squared. You didn't write w squared. Don't change it, okay? So then let's look at the problem below it. There's 4 terms here, although you actually could combine those 2 terms. I actually have 2 of these in here that they're in here more for the process of how to group than any other reason. Now, I'm going to group, and I've set this up in this introductory video here so that when you group the first 2 terms and then you group the next 2 terms, I want you to notice this plus goes with this term. Don't group it with the blue, group it with the brown there, okay? So when you group the first 2 and the last 2, they work in this video. Do you think that always works? The answer is no, it doesn't. You may have to rearrange your terms and group the first term with the third term or either the first term with the fourth term. Okay, so don't just assume that it always works with first and second, and that doesn't work if it doesn't work. So here, x squared plus 2x, what do they have in common? Well, this is a GCF of just the blue stuff. X and then x plus 2. And then we forget about those 2 terms and we move to the next 2 terms. We forget about those 2 terms and we go to these 2 terms over here. Okay, so what does plus 4x plus 8 have in common? Well, it has a 4, but you got to have a sign right here. So what are these? Typically we bring this sign right here out. Not always, but try that. So we're going to bring a plus 4, and if I bring a plus out, don't change any signs, so they're both going to be positive. Take a 4 out, we're left with x plus, take a 4 out of 8, you're left with a 2 because you're dividing. And here is where I go, hey, did grouping work? Grouping worked if these 2 things were the same up here, right? So guess what? Are these 2 things the same right here? Yep. So did grouping work? The answer is yes, and that is my GCF now, that entire parenthesis x plus 2. That's what I bring out front as my GCF. And then I'm left over with something in blue and brown. What am I left over with in blue? X. What am I left over with in brown? Plus 4. Right? So x plus 2, and then I'm left over with x plus 4. And again, I know I'm done. Why was I not done here? That plus sign is not in parentheses. That's why I'm not done. Okay? Here, in parentheses, in parentheses. Any powers bigger than 1? Nope. Any GCF in either one of those parentheses? Nope. That's how I check to see if I'm done factoring each time. So let's look at some more grouping problems here. All right, this has 4 terms. If there's 4 terms or more, you group. Now, we're typically in introductory stuff, we just do 4 terms. Okay, that's all I'm going to concentrate on here. So here, first 2 terms in yellow, what do they have in common? Y squared, the lowest power of y. They both have y's in them. And I'm left with y minus 2. Okay, let's go to the next 2 terms. What do these two terms have in common? A 5, and it's a plus 5. Remember, bring this sign and bring it down. It doesn't always work, but try that. If I bring out a plus 5, I'm left with y minus 2. None of the signs change if I bring a plus out. If I brought a minus there, I'd change my signs, but I'd leave them. So plus stayed positive here, and then minus stayed negative, okay? Did grouping work? Yes, these two things are the same, so what am I going to factor out front? The group, that's the same. That's my GCF now, y minus 2. And what am I left with? I'm left with y squared in yellow, and in gray I'm left with plus 5, okay? Plus 5. So I like to color code these, and if you are colorblind, I am sorry, because you may just see a difference in hue and not see the colors, but if you're not, then hopefully it helps you to see what exactly is going on here. Now, I boxed that. I need to talk about it a little bit. My pluses and minuses are in parentheses. They're good, but I have a power bigger than 1. This particular one won't go any further. This particular one will not go any further. All right, so y minus 2 times y squared plus 5, and that is as far as this one will go. All right, but sometimes that'll factor further. So as we learn more methods of factoring, just understand that you could have a grouping followed by something else or whatnot. All right. So here again, 4 terms. So let's try the first two. So x squared's in common, and what are we left with after that? X plus 6. And then let's try the next 2 terms. They're both negative this time. A 2 goes into it, but bring this sign out. So try a negative. And if I bring a negative out, all the signs change. They're both negative up here, so they're both going to be positive in here. Okay? So negative 2 times what is negative 2x? X. Negative 2 times a positive 6 gives me negative 12. So then I ask myself, did grouping work? X plus 6 and x plus 6? Yes, grouping worked. So x plus 6. And then what's left over? Well, in my little kind of light blue here, x squared. And then what's left over in orange? Minus 2. Again, I look at this and go, okay, am I done or do I need to keep going? Well, right here I wasn't done because that wasn't in parentheses. But now my pluses and minuses are in parentheses, okay? And then this power is bigger than 1, but this thing won't factor. X squared minus 2 will not factor any further, not with integers and whole numbers, so we're not going to go any further with that. So x plus 6 and then x squared minus 2 is the grouping there, right? So grouping did work, and it turned out to be that right there. All right, so let's do one more grouping. We have 4 terms again. Again, you could put the 2 middle terms together, but again, for the sake of practicing this, let's try these first 2 terms. What do they have in common? Well, they have a 3, and they have an m. And then I'm left with what? M minus 2n, right? I have an n in that term. So not only minus 2, but minus 2n. And let's look at the next 2 terms here. We have plus 5 n this time, right? That has an n in it. There's an n in both terms, right? And so if I'm left with, let's see, m minus 2 and another n, right? Because I had n squared there. Did grouping work here? Well, m minus 2n, right? So it looks like it worked. M minus 2n. And then what's left over? Well, in the blue, there's left over what? 3m. And in the bright green, there's left over what? Plus 5n. And both my pluses and minuses are in parentheses. There's no powers bigger than 1. There's no GCF in there, so I know I'm done factoring. So I hope this helps you with grouping. If you see 4 terms, again, this is a basic grouping introductory video. If grouping gets bigger, you can use the same concepts. You may be grouping 3 terms at a time, or 3 sets of 2 terms, or something like that. So hope this helps, and good luck factoring.